What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you a look at Chernobylite 2 Exclusion Zone, which just recently launched into early access a couple of days ago on the 6th, I believe, and I'm bringing you this look via a key that the devs sent over, which I accepted because I had heard a lot of good things about the original Chernobylite, which launched, I want to say back in like 2021 or something. Even though it kind of passed me by, it has pretty high reviews and is sitting on a very positive to this day. So I figured why not jump in and check out what the sequel had to offer. Now, this sequel is the result of a Kickstarter campaign, and it's launching into early access to, of course, solicit feedback, but so far that feedback has been a bit mixed. Most people seem to be upset about the general optimization of the game, which I can confirm it is a bit jittery. And frankly, I think just looking at this title, you can probably tell it's definitely a janky sort of experience. But I personally enjoy a good weird janky RPG, so that's hardly off-putting to me personally, and I didn't have like any major technical problems. It didn't crash on me or anything, but to be fair, I didn't play it extensively either. Now, straight away, towards the beginning of the video here, I wanted to mention that while playing this, it gave me a lot of vibes from a similar game that I've played called Elix. Elix was a big favorite of mine, and I kind of saw a lot of that sort of DNA in this game at least. Even if it's unintentional, it played very similarly, which was an enjoyable experience for me personally. But with that out of the way, let's actually jump in and start talking about this game. So we are put in the role of a planewalker, and if you're like me, you're probably moving to dust off your old Slivers deck, but it's actually not that kind of planeswalker. Rather, we are hired by a company to explore alternate dimensions in order to obtain a substance known as Chernobylite, which is basically a magic energy source MacGuffin caused by its namesake's nuclear disaster. That disaster led to an infinite amount of alternative universes, and some of those universes have taken to going to other universes to harvest said material to use as energy to power human advancement. Now, unsurprisingly, this quickly goes wrong and we find ourselves trapped in a particular world's exclusion zone where we have to battle it out between 3 different factions as we try to find our way back to our own home dimension. A straightforward and compelling enough reason to get going. Now, along our journey, we're going to be building our character, though the character itself is set, but playstyle, it's pretty freeform, and then we'll be dealing with 3 different factions that control the zone, and we'll even be building our own base and everything while we're at it. So this game's got a lot of different stuff going on, and I can see why they wanted to go into early access to try to get some feedback on all of the moving parts. But we start the game by running through a quick tutorial to get you up to date with the basics, but also in order to give you some opportunities to mess around with some different types of combat so you can pick a starting class for yourself. Now, this starting class is just that, a starting class. It gets you kind of going in terms of your starting attributes, which determine a whole bunch of secondary stats, while also focusing on the either melee, ranged, or kind of magic combat of all things. Now, melee and ranged are pretty much what you'd expect. You've got melee weapons to pound enemies with, your block, your dodge, all the usual stuff. Ranged includes actual guns and weaponry, as you'd guess by all the high-tech nonsense going around us. But the sort of magic gloves are especially interesting to me because these effectively allow you to shoot various elements, including radioactivity, at various enemies. You can swap between 2 different elements on a given glove, but what's more, it's actually a bit of a high-risk, high-reward sort of playstyle because in order to restore your essence to actually cast the glove's powers, you have to take on radioactivity, which means depleting into your own health as you take that damage in order to replenish your essence to attack further, which I could see some potential for in terms of messing around with in the wider scope of things as you explore the zone. Now, you can also sort of mix and match these with a few extra classes that lean into a sort of hybrid situation, and each of them has their pros and cons. But once we get moving and picking up experience, you will eventually be able to start increasing your stats as well as potentially learning skills if you can find an appropriate trainer to teach them to you, which I imagine is where a lot of the factions come in. Once we've got our sort of bearings established after the accident that sees us stranded here in the zone abates, we can finally sort of get set up and set up shop quite literally in our home base that we'll get to build, which includes the base building section of the game. It looks like you'll be able to customize a significant area around this sort of bunker system to set up various rooms to help your character out, as well as just decorate if you want, which will give you even more use for the various companions and things that you'll be picking up along the way. Once we've got all that sorted out, however, we are pretty much free to explore. So the Exclusion Zone, which is the game's namesake, is going to see us exploring pretty freely and interacting with these factions. which means we're going to come into contact with all sorts of mutant beings. Pretty much anything affected by the Chernobylite seems to mutate and change them in various ways, including you, because your class is actually a genetic augmentation combined to let you handle this Chernobylite. Now, my understanding is that later on, this is actually going to allow you to sort of hot swap between different builds and stuff, utilizing the concept of the plane walking that is central to the theme and the story here. Now, while out exploring, you can use your handy-dandy tablet to scan things, which is going to give you some background on what's been happening in this particular timeline, what is going on with these giant mutated creatures, why this particular zone was sort of blocked off from the rest of the world right as the accident occurred in your own world, and what's kind of at the root of that connection. But as you've almost certainly seen on screen by now, combat itself is a little wonky, I would say. Like, it feels fine, but I don't think it's anything to write home about either. If anything, I think it's a little easy. The animations are obviously a little all over the place, but generally speaking, I think it's okay. I've certainly played a lot worse, though it's probably worth a mention that it is available in either first or third person, which means you can switch between those as you please, but regardless of the perspective, a lot of your combat effectiveness is going to come from your attributes and your equipment. So equipment is pretty standard stuff as well, various tiers of gear that increase your overall protection, while also typically requiring you to have certain attributes at a minimum so you don't take a penalty to that given item you're trying to use. But over the course of this game's trip through early access, the thing I would keep an eye on personally is just how sort of diverse and impactful some of these abilities and attributes feel as you explore, and if it's like a super necessary thing, and does it culminate in a character that actually feels unique, or is it just kind of dressing, you know? But in addition to all of that, there are sort of like attribute checks throughout the world in terms of like opening things or interacting with the environment in certain contexts, like say forcing something open, and then even in conversation there have been like attribute specific dialogues and stuff. So like I mentioned towards the beginning, in basically a pretty substantial way, this game really reminds me of something like Elix, and that's enjoyable for me personally, which is obviously why I wanted to bring you guys this video. But I think you can tell pretty much just by looking at this one that it's clearly a bit rough around the edges, especially at the launch of its early access period, but like plenty of games, when this game gets around to launching in full, I will probably take a proper look at it and see about giving it a review, because as weird and janky as it is, I'm pretty into it. But for today and this video, I think that's pretty much going to cover it. So hope you enjoyed all that. If you did, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. Lot going on later in the month, a little slow at the moment, but definitely some big things coming up in the next few weeks. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.